All right, so I'd like to call the Facilities Enrollment Task Force to order. And our first order of business would be to get approval of the January 30th minutes. So I would take a motion on that. If anyone's had a time to review them or needs to review them.
They were sent out ahead of time.
Yes, they were.
I would make a motion to approve the minutes of the facility enrollment task force.
Can I get a second?
A second.
Okay, so Tara and Wendy. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, so now we're going to move on to Neil's presentation about the feedback on the options that we've received over the last month or so since we've met.
Right. So thank you. We're going to pivot really the conversation tonight. So obviously many of our all of our last several meetings have really been run by Jeff Wyszynski, who's here again tonight from Tecton. Our goal tonight is really to talk about the feedback that we've been receiving from the community. And if Tecton has done its portion of the work in presenting us with options. And as you remember from where we were in late January, our goal at that point was to get some feedback about the options we had through really two formats. One was our neighborhood meetings. They were terrific. I can tell you that we had Susan was at 3 of the 5 neighborhood meetings. Jeff Tyndall, who's our chair of this, was also at 3 of the 5, and other board members made it to at least 30 people at every one of them, and in some cases upwards of 80 and 100 people at the meeting. So they were really well attended and the feedback was fabulous. So what I'm going to do is go through a few slides where we've tried to summarize the feedback that we got at those meetings. And then you'll remember that the other way that we got feedback was through the survey that we put out to the community. So the survey is pretty telling, and we did it in 2 ways. We put it out to our staff, certified faculty members across the district, and then we put it out to community members. So a very good return rate on our staff, over 250 out of a population of 360-something teachers. And about 1,200 members of the community who responded to our survey. So we're going to go through that. I'm going to go pretty rapid fire to show you what the feedback is, because actually this is a quicker recap of a presentation that we did last night for the Board of Education. So the board actually saw the presentation and had a robust discussion after the presentation and actually made some pretty consequential decisions for us that I'll turn it over to Susan at that point and talk about it. So the good news is at the beginning of this that you're an educated audience about where we've been. So I will breeze through the summary of current options. Tecton has changed the slides slightly. I'll probably just show you what has changed since our late January meeting. I'll do the slides on the feedback from the neighborhood meetings and then go through the survey results. And then we'll talk about you're our next step, bringing it to here. So obviously our whole team from Tecton, this was put in last night because Jeff actually was at a meeting in another community going through this process. So we wanted to make sure that we gave Jeff the kudos for all the work that he did in leading us through. This was certainly to put in perspective where we've been, that making sure that people understand this conversation about different configurations and different options is part of a much broader thing that we've been at for 18 months now with an existing conditions study, a demographics study, and we just wanted to make sure that was understood by the folks who were at the meeting. And obviously highlighted at the bottom here is now where we are, is developing that long-range master plan. Want to make sure that people understand the demographic pressure from the elementary school level. We're trying to look at 2 things at once: aging elementary facilities and also the quickly changing demographics in a couple of places. So what I highlight on this slide, the top purplish line is Squadron Line community, and you can see current population of 601 moving up to 704 But I will note on almost all of these, you can see that the curve goes up much more quickly in the first half of the 10-year time frame than in the second half. Almost all of the population is coming in, so 704 is the high mark about 5 years in. The other school that's going to experience significant increases if the demographics stay the same is the yellow line of Latimer Lane, current 445 and highest point 550. So important to understand that those are going to be our initial pressure points. And the others, much more stable. So fortunately, you've already seen the options, so we can get more toward the back end of the presentation quickly. You'll see option 1. This came up at the neighborhood meeting, so I'm saying it over and over again. Option 1 is there was a pretty serious misconception that because we numbered it 1, that the board this was their preferred option. And that was out there at some of our meetings. So we don't know how to solve that problem. You have to do something. So it's just number 1, it's not priority 1. And as you'll remember, what we had done after the feedback from the public forum at Henry James, we wanted to make sure we had options on the table that included keeping all 5 schools, 5 elementary schools open and intact. So option 1 was presented as a 5-6 school, and we got options of what would it look like if you did 3 of the 5 elementary schools to remain, 4 of the 5 to remain, or all 5 to remain. And this was presented last month in response to, when we did this in November, this option was not shown. So that was added in. And the differences in some of the options are whether you equalize the population or in the option C, showing kind of the current boundaries, what the population would be if you pulled out 5th and 6th grade. So that's sort of what this slide is. This is an important thing to, over the course of our neighborhood meetings, people were getting caught up in why is one school listed as a recommend of new and why are others renovate as new? And it was a strategic decision to say, when we got to each project in this 20 to 30 year master plan, both options should be considered. And so now we list all of them in all of these different options as it could be either. So that's a pretty significant change from what we did. And as you'll remember, did I get it? Yep. The test fit of what a 5th and 6th grade school might look like on the Henry James campus, with existing Henry James here, built 2 stories to the back. So as you know, that's option 1. Option 2 was moving just the 6th grade to Henry James and doing it as sort of a separate 6th grade pod or neighborhood at the north end of the school. And so on this, we showed 2 options, one that kept 2A that kept 4 elementary schools, and in this case, we said it could be any of the 4. It's not, there was the feeling that the Terriffill community had been targeted as the only school that was in the conversation. That wasn't the case, but we wanted to show it graphically that it really could be any of the elementary schools. And then in an option where all 5 stayed open. So basically, if you pulled 6th grade out, you can see you would have almost exactly 2,000 students left. If you distributed those over 4 schools, it would be 500 per school. And if you distributed them over 5 schools, it would be 400 per school. Obviously, as we've talked about these options, it wouldn't be perfectly equalized. You would, it would be somewhere in between those numbers. And we recognize that. Some redistricting would take place probably, but not an entire reinvention. So as this was imagined, this is the north end of the Henry James campus and sort of a 6th grade wing that is more isolated from the rest of the building, so that while 6th graders would transition to that building, they would be more in their own area of the school for the majority of the day. They would continue to use cafeterias, gyms, other shared facilities, but for the most part their academic work would be in a kind of separate pod up at that end of the school. with a small addition, it shows up easier on this slide. This would be the imagined 6th grade wing with this other purple being an addition to the cafeteria to accommodate that. So that remained our option 2 from last month. And then option 3 was to do neither of those things and keep our existing structure. Now, what does it look like if you just try to attack the needs of our current K-6 schools? And as same format that each of these options has had, one in this case, one in which you keep the current lines, current district boundaries, and one in which you try to equalize. So if you did this, what does your top K-6 population get to? That would be matching that population slide I showed you earlier in the presentation. And then if you tried to equalize, you'd be right at about 480 students. So again, the answer would be somewhere in between those things. As we built a project figuring out what size it would be to achieve a longer term goal. With that said, we were urged coming out of the first public forum to also talk about the idea that if you really chose none of these options to seriously renovate as new or build a new school for any of the 5 elementary schools, it doesn't mean that the Board of Ed would have no costs in terms of maintaining its school, because they're aging facilities. And so Jeff had talked us through this last month that certainly in the short term, to deal with the population, it would definitely mean adding modular classrooms to certainly Latimer, and probably shifting some population away from Squadron Line, which is the other school really feeling the demographic pinch. And then you'd be in a situation where you were trying to, fix old windows or a few core spaces over the course of a summer, and bathrooms and HVAC systems, and over time. It would still have a cost associated with it, but in the sense that you would be needing to do maintenance to your buildings over that period of time. So with those as the options, this summary slide became a look at the costs for again, step 1 only, so you'll remember this from last month. And the 2 numbers, again, are top number being total cost of the project and what a referendum would have to approve. Bottom number being actual cost to the town after state reimbursement. And you'll remember that renovate as new construction actually has a higher reimbursement rate from the state than new projects do. So if you explain then, if a new 5-6 school is 65 million, why does the cost end up at 52 as opposed to a higher overall of 66, but the actual cost to the town will be 49? It's because of that higher reimbursement rate for renovate as new. So, and as this committee will recall, we haven't shown a lot of it to the public. Jeff has shown us all the details between how those costs get reached. So, and then, a third option being that if you chose not to do anything with 5th and 6th grade, it's, preferably getting a project approved as soon as possible for Latimer Lane, which is the clear first priority. So, all right, with that said, these timelines this committee is familiar with. So, if we approved a project in 2021, you're looking at 2024 before you could get anything open, and then this committee has also seen this longer term timeline, and as I've been pointing out to the public, this is way out into the end of the 2030s when you get to this end of the timeline, as you look at multiple projects and trying to spread out the tax burden over an appropriate period of time. So, to get to the neighborhood meetings, and they were great. I mean, right from the beginning, people were highly engaged in the conversation. I want you to know at each of them, we had parents from that elementary school. We also had older folks from the community who did not have kids in school anymore at every single meeting. So our ability to communicate and get that word out drew people in, and we were really pleased about it. So I'm just going to summarize for you what we heard while we were out there. And I think the first two bullets are probably the number one thing, that we had a presentation around possibilities of buildings and architecture and demographics and numbers, and they wanted to engage more in the conversation of, please talk to us about before we can make a decision, what are the educational benefits of why you would want to do a 5-6 school or a 6th grade school? Like, you need more conversation about the educational benefits of your models, and that's certainly the place where I think we have to turn the conversation. A lot of people wanted to know what other communities were doing, and that's where we tried to answer. There really is no right answer out there. You look at our other Farmington Valley schools, Avon and Farmington are doing a 5-6 model, and Granby and West Hartford are doing 6-7-8. There's no right answer here. Perfectly comparable communities are doing different things. And in fact, you'll find when you look at Durg A and Durg B added together, it's really, K6 is in the minority. It's really 70% of the schools are in more of a larger middle school model. The next couple of bullets specific to Latimer Lane, they saw those timeline things and went, oh my God, we're not going to get any relief for 4 years? Like, what's the plan for now? And Latimer Lane had a lot of concerns about the overcrowding in their school and the plans that would have to go into place to just deal with that piece of it. And there were certainly comments from people who said, all right, that 5-6 school where it looks like the populations drop pretty significantly and it's more possible that a school would close. I don't want to support anything if it's going to close even if it's not my school, I don't want to support something that might close another school in town because that was a pretty significant theme. These questions came up, what happens to a vacant building? We talked a little bit about how other communities have repurposed schools. A lot of people who came to understand that that it's not just about the conditions of the building, it's about the demographics at the same time. It's trying to solve two things at once. This was a really strong theme in some of the meetings. Like, asking you to take a leap of faith about thinking about 5th, 6th, and there were people like, I can't possibly imagine what I would support unless you can tell me who my kid's going to be on the bus with. Like, is my 5th grader going to be on the bus with high school kids? In that case, I'm out. Like, it was, and we're saying, like, look, all of that, if we made a decision, we'd have 4 years to figure out logistics, and but that was certainly a theme, that they want more details of kind of how we might imagine any of the options. There were certainly a few concerns raised about upper elementary, 5th and 6th grade kids being with what we now perceive to be middle school kids and those influences of older kids. The questions about our previous study when we looked at the 5-6 school that we imagined as potentially being squadron line school, and didn't we already consider this? And we tried to explain that we saw it as a different thing by uniting it with the Henry James campus, that it was really a quite different proposal. Supporters of the K6 structure, and then a lot of questions about equalizing and why would you do that, and understanding what happens with redistricting, like how you shave off neighborhoods, and people were interested in those conversations. And then the last slide on this feedback, encouraging us to, obviously we have teachers on this group that have engaged in the conversation. We've engaged with, it was actually interesting as word got out about how our neighborhood meetings were being well attended. The last two drew a whole bunch of teachers. We had a whole bunch of teachers from Central School and a whole bunch of teachers from Terriffill School who participated in the neighborhood meeting. But a message to us to get them more involved as we continue on. That emphasis that the kind of status quo still comes with a cost. Concerns about the capacity at core spaces, especially at the crowded building, like bringing a whole bunch of kids into the Latimer Lane gymatorium and holding a concert. It's just jammed, packed. And concerns about parking at all of the facilities when you're running a school event. and making sure that that's considered. A little bit about multi-unit housing, and some interesting comments about it would be nice to go back to a day where preschool was in more places, and because it actually makes, for the littlest ones, the transition from preschool to K. Like, it would be a nice thing if you could put that into more buildings. So that's a very quick summary of the neighborhood meetings. I'm going to turn to our other board members or administrators who were at them.
I mean, we really appreciated the feedback. I mean, it's exactly what we had to do, and we got different feels from different buildings because they all have different challenges, and that's important for us to recognize too.
Yeah, I was impressed by the attendance and by the tenor of the conversation at the ones I went to, and the feedback, because it really helped shape our board discussion last night. It really helped us kind of put a point on that.
All right, so there we go, there's my survey slides. I'm going to show you, first of all, the participation rates. I mentioned them at the beginning. We ended up, this number is a little over 250, actually. We didn't make that edit. And this one is 1180, so that's where we ended up on the community side. Very good response rates. Starting with the staff survey. The survey results from staff are more stark. This is a pretty, I pulled 5 questions from each survey. So this one, we asked the question in different ways. Would you support a 6th grade addition to Henry James Memorial School? If you know anything about surveying, 80-20 results are pretty significant. And so this is our certified faculty in Simsbury, 80% of them saying they would support the notion of 6th grade to Henry James. When you ask that same question about the 5th grade at 6th grade school, there's still support, but it drops pretty significantly. And you can see that the 5th and 6th grade school is much more in the 60-40 type of range in terms of an approval rating from faculty. You'll recall our survey was designed one question asking you to actually rank the choices. And how did that come out? So to orient you to this slide, this is the existing structure, current K6. And you can see by a ranking mechanism, it's consistent with what the other slide said, our faculty is saying existing structure is very clearly their 3rd choice. Middle pod of bars here is the 5th and 6th grade school, which is pretty spread out. And then 6th grade wing at Henry James clearly has the most number 1 responses and the most number 2 responses. So pretty strong opinions from the faculty. Later in the survey, we asked the question one more way just to see if answers were consistent. Where do you believe the most effective location for grade 6 is? And you don't, for existing structure, you don't hit 18%. So that was surprising. I thought that it would skew this way. I didn't think it would skew this strongly this way in my preconceived idea of what might happen with our survey. So, and then one more question for our staff. We asked a question about, would you support renovations, a new school on the same site, or it doesn't matter? We thought it might be more of like a new school on the same site to save that construction disruption, and you'll see that that wasn't the case. The faculty said it doesn't matter as long as the needs are met, was very much the response. So shifting to the community portion of it, same question, would you support a 6th grade? Not in the same way as the faculty did, but still a majority, that you're 55-45 in the community saying they would support a 6th grade moving to the middle school. And you'll see that these percentages of a little over half remain consistent no matter how we ask the question. When you ask about the 5-6 school, the same way it dropped for faculty, it drops for the community. Not much more than a third of the people who say they would support that option. Just to demonstrate the other ways it was asked, if you, again, same orientation, existing structure gets the most first place votes by far, the 5-6 school gets the most third place votes by far, and the 6th grade is sort of the in the middle choice. when you ask the same question of where's the most effective place, red is the 6th grade option, a third, a little less than 20% who were still in the 5-6 mode, and consistently a little less than half saying existing structure. And then one more question, tried to get a little bit at the tax implications of this. Would you support this plan? The blue is yes, the need is clear. The red is yes, but it needs to be a phased approach to mitigate the tax impact. And a third, that yellow is taxes are too high now, 33%. So with that said, we took comments from our Board of Ed, and I'm going to have my Board of Ed members talk to you about what happened at the end of their meeting.
So we had this discussion last night, we saw the same presentation, and Tara and Jeff and I kind of spoke about the feedback we heard at the different community meetings we attended. And the result of that, for us, universally, the three of us, was the 5-6 school is a non-starter in all of the community meetings. It tends to paralyze the conversation. And that, I think, is a direct result of the fact that you closed 2 schools. Because financially, you cannot justify pulling 2 grades out and having 5 elementary schools. And we were very clear about that we would have to do something. And in that vein, as we talked about it, what we decided as a board was the best thing, if we were all in agreement, and we were, was to remove the 5-6 because it really has the least support community-wide of the options. It is really far too difficult to justify going against everybody who wants to remain in their community school. And that really just became abundantly clear. So the board as a whole asked that we remove the 5-6 option. So tonight we're asking you to kind of look at the remaining options. The other thing we asked was that status quo come off, because status quo is what we do now. That's really not an option. That is a punch list of maintenance items that we have to attend to. It is not improving spaces, it's not relieving the pressures we have in each building. That's just how we handle our buildings. Who needs a roof? Who needs a boiler? Who needs windows? That's all that is. So it's really not an option for a master plan because we have to get at that in a different way altogether. So what we're asking this group tonight is to help us frame a public forum around option 2. Can you throw that back up there?
Cindy will have to do it.
Option 2B, which is 5 schools remaining, 6th grade at Henry James, if I'm remembering right, and I should. 5 schools remaining, 6th grade at Henry James, and a renovation to Latimer. And that would be our bundled option. So we would work on Latimer and the 6th grade wing at Henry James at the same time. And then option, to the B side, because A is only 4 elementary schools, and the community is not going to support that at this point in time. And we have the enrollment numbers to support the 5 schools going forward, K-5. And then if we do 3, which was,
Yeah, you could, it'll be just a few more slides for it. Up at the top. Yep.
that's the renewal plan for the buildings, for all the buildings. We talk about this one, it says no redistrict or redistrict. What bothers me personally in this one is we still end up with a squadron line of 720 and a lateral lane of 554. And that provides for inequities across the district. You can't do the same with those numbers in those schools, depending on how we renovate or they're new. So, personally, I'm more for the 3B, but that's me personally. And that's something
Or
that I think
somewhere in between.
somewhere in between. Certainly not an equal redistricting, because we know we're not putting 478 kids in Tarifa. That's not going to happen. But we'd have to redistrict those numbers. So I think, for me, 3 works better with a redistrict, because it gets at what the original heart of the plan was how to improve our elementary facilities for everybody and take the pressures off Latimer Lane and Squadron Line. And what's the best way to go about that? So we're asking for this group to concentrate tonight on how we want to move those 2 options forward at the public forum, and your feedback on, and thoughts on those 2 options. Do you want to add anything, Sarah?
I think that clearly, this is not the first time we've talked about schools, neighborhoods, and what our town makeup is and what the importance to people who live here. And clearly, once again, it has been proven that the town, one of our special powers is the 5 neighborhood schools, and that's really important to everyone in town. As far as cutting the forest down for the trees, that's something we don't want to do. And we've spent years doing Band-Aids to schools. Our average age of schools is 76 years old.
For elementary school is 74 point.
So, I mean, obviously, it's been a lot of boilers, it's been a lot of roofs, it's been a lot of pieces. And as you all know, the technology and the way schools and kids are being taught these days, we definitely have to think a little bit further ahead than what we have in the past as far as keeping things status quo. And I think that that really is what this plan was put in place for. We worked with the Board of Finance and the Selectmen and ourselves all felt a plan for schools in our facilities, town buildings that are used by everybody in town, as well as, our educational facilities. Needs to be a plan where you're making a pledge to the future as opposed to just staying still, and we want to be as responsible as we can and fiscally responsible. We just have to make sure that we do what the town's asking us to do. So I think those are some of the things I got from.
And I think it's important to note, that as we went through this, many of the people in the audiences at the small community meetings will not have kids in school by the time we get to 2024 when we open our first building. So we've approached it as, you need to think beyond your own family and what do you want as a community? And that really helps shape the conversation at each of these schools, because we're moving this forward as a community project. It's not, as we have said, because some people seem to think that the Board of Ed is not aware of this, but we are taxpayers too. And we are not doing this for our own gratification. We're doing this because the schools are at a point where they need attention, and we have to come up with the best model to provide that attention. And then the Board of Ed has to vote on it, and then we have to meet with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, and then if everybody agrees there, ultimately the community has its say at referendum. So that's sort of the message that I have given resoundingly, is that at the end of the day, the community gets the say. So we need to, that's the lens with which I've been trying to shape the conversation, is that it's not just about what's right for you and your children, it's about what's right for the town.
I would just add, coming out of the last facilities and enrollment meeting, it was very helpful because there were people in the room that pushed on the importance of figuring out the best first option. And as we went into this work and you're trying to focus on creating this perfect arc of what it'll look like, clearly some of the talk at the end of the plan got in the way at the beginning of the plan. So I think we've,
Yes.
with the help of the board and the direction of the board last night, really narrowed it. You can have a more productive conversation now, I think, with really 2 things in the fold. The importance of identifying what the values are and the rationale and some of the research behind that 6, 7, 8 model. Erin, in a few minutes, isn't going to share what that research is, but talk to you about some of the steps we've taken already to put that together and some of the other steps we're thinking about, because we do believe that should be a piece of that next forum. There should be a level of the presentation that talks about what are the educational reasons to move this forward and to discuss this further. So I don't know if you want to share that now.
So, well, yeah, just to frame,
Can I just make one more
yeah, go
point
ahead.
before we go down that road, to sort of, to piggyback on what you were saying, is, again, as we're shaping this plan, we're working with 10-year enrollment projections. So we can shape the plan up front for the first 10 years pretty well based on the information we have at hand. Beyond that, and what we like about the phased approach, is we do get to revisit it with each building. So we get to go back and see, where's our enrollment? South Windsor, we've talked about it before, they've ended up building a much bigger last school because of the influx of people to their town because they started working on their school buildings and renovating and building new ones. So we have to remember that while we're working on this 20-year plan, the first 10 years are more tangible than the second 10 years, and that's going to have to be revisited as we go through each project. I just want to leave that on the table.
So, just to frame the rest of the meeting, if you would take a quick look at your agenda, this is where we're looking for your participation tonight to help us. So we're really, based on the actions that the board took last night on the sequence of these meetings, we're really in a debate of, does it make sense to move 6th grade to Henry James or to stay where we are? And you answer that question through two things. Either there's compelling educational reasons to do it. The 6, 7, 8 model offers us some possibilities that are enticing and that are important educationally. We clearly heard from the forums that people want to know more about that. And the other reason why you might do it is because of demographic pressure, and that we know that Aaron's going to talk for a few minutes, and we want to hear from you about those issues around educationally, what people would need to hear as we head toward a forum, and then I'm going to share. This committee, in its pre-Tecton days, did a lot, most of its work on demographics, and I'm going to show you another demographic piece that demonstrates where the pressure is coming most quickly. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
So what I will share with you is the process of what we've accomplished some of, but look forward to pulling together for the forum next week. Number one, we have 3 administrators in the district right now that have been our middle school principal, myself, Sue Lemke, and Scott Baker, which dates back to starting in 2004. So there's information and experience that those 3 people have had. We have started, we have a thick literature review, pros and cons regarding 6th grade, or it's called middle school, and some people will call it a 5-8, some a 6. So we have to look into that a little bit more clearly. But what we do know is the developmental stages that these young kids are going through, moving from a childhood to adolescence. So that's one of the pieces that will pull more information together through literature. We had the opportunity last week to sit with our full administrative council, engage them in about 5 or 6 questions regarding educating students from the elementary to the middle level and then to the high school. So really getting their pros and cons regarding the information, the questions that we asked. As Neil talked about, the district reference groups. Durgay, which is really the Fairfield County, about 9 or 10 districts down there. 6 of them have a 6, 7, 8 school. We are in Durg B. There's about 14 districts. 9 of them have 6, 7, 8 schools. We are going to, Scott and I are going to reach out and try to connect with some of those 6, 7, 8 principals to see what they believe are the pros and cons of the middle level education that they've experienced in their principalship. The survey results clearly are something that we'll pull together as well and include in a presentation. So it's a process. We've got a lot of information. We still have a little bit more so that we can pull together pretty clear, distinct pros and cons of middle level education. At some point, students have to transition. We understand those transitions, and we have to make the best decision educationally, academically, socially, emotionally, and developmentally. So we're going to try to provide that kind of information to you, as well as the benefits to the educators that are educating these students as well. What benefits does it show in regard to pulling 6th grade teachers together? One of the things we know is the content is much deeper now, and skill sets, really trying to build the knowledge and skill of our teachers to work collaboratively. We learn best when we work with each other, as educators do. So those are the kinds of things that we'll include in our conversation.
Can you find out if any of those schools, or maybe you already know, have any of those 6, 7, 8 schools made the transition in the last 5 years or
We
so
can find that out.
that maybe could lend to the advantages or disadvantages they've seen in a more recent time.
Okay.
That might be helpful.
Any other areas of interest that I might not have mentioned? Scott?
Or other educators who want to talk about
Right.
middle level education.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, I've not only was I in middle school, trying to make sixth grade work at Terraville for quite some time, but also taught sixth grade in West Hartford at a 6-8 school, so I can lend my experience to that, but also reach out to some of my contacts in West Hartford. It's good to hear from sixth grade teachers, both
Yeah,
Set.
that's another piece.
Oh, I
that-
forgot to
yeah.
mention that.
You know?
Our elementary principals are meeting with our sixth grade teachers and speaking with them as a professional learning community too. What are the pros and cons that they see? That's a good point. Sorry, I didn't mention that.
Yeah, I mean, even my administrative interns and sixth grade teachers, we can talk to them as well.
And I had the opportunity in my career to be an administrator in a 6, 7, 8 building in Farmington, and then moved, I was 4 years there as an assistant principal, out of capacity needs issues. We built a 5-6, and I went there as a building principal. Maggie, you've been at the 5-6 in Avon at one point. So we do have expertise within the group. Steve, you're a middle school teacher.
6, yeah. So I did have an opportunity to meet with our sixth grade teachers today, and they are going to come up with like a list. So we talked a little bit about it in our PLC this afternoon. They're more than happy to meet. They would also suggest that they'd like to meet with the team of sixth grade too to brainstorm some
Sure.
ideas. And really the big key was for us was like what's best for the kids, what's best for the Simsbury kids, because I think you're going to find pros and cons on both ends of it, as some of the literature will show. But what's really best for our kids in Simsbury.
Right, and we're hearing comments already that I could get behind the sixth grade model.
Yes.
I probably would want to stay in the elementary school myself, but so that comment has come out. I thought the woman in public forum last night at the Board of Education was really interesting. So our meeting was at Latimer Lane. We had quite a few Latimer parents there. And it's not going to come out on SCTV because the way the microphones were set up there, they caught our whole meeting except for public forum. But this woman got up and talked about, if you had asked me a few years ago, I was a full believer that K-6 was the way to go, and that's one of the reasons why we were particularly attracted to Simsbury. But now that I've had a kid in middle school and the thought of adding another grade to that experience, I'd be open to hearing more. That was a really interesting public comment last night from a parent who said, depends when you ask me the question what my
But she still has an elementary school child who's.
She has, yeah, 2 in high school, a middle school, and an elementary, so as, she wouldn't have said that before the kids had gone through the middle school, now understanding that they might need more time.
And her husband also went through Simsbury schools as well.
Yes.
He's a Latimer Lane alum.
Yes.
It seems important that your public forum, you emphasize that you've been thinking about a sixth grade school for a long time. You're not focusing on it now just
Right.
because the board made a decision last night.
Right.
You're not thinking about it now because you got pushback on a 5-6. You've wanted to do this. Because you're trying to create space, so you create a new building. But you're also trying to create educational benefit for all the kids.
Right.
Because what's the option? Are you going to explain to the public what's the option if you do nothing? Where are we if we don't create a 6, 7, 8? Latimer parents are going to face the portables, right? It seems pretty clear if you don't go to that model, you are going to have those portables.
Right.
Is that, and that with this committee, that's all we did the first 4 years was get rid of portables. And
Yep.
what do you do now? Just add them back. Is that the solution?
Well, and what we've talked about too is, a lot in the smaller meetings is if we do nothing, we need to redistrict because Latimer Lane cannot sustain. You saw on the enrollment, it go in 2 years.
But even with
And
redistricting, it looked like within 4 years, you're going to need additional
we need more
square footage.
space.
of different
Absolutely.
Right.
And
But you-
so we get into that a little bit, but it's also, doing nothing isn't an option because whatever we do is gonna cost the town some money. We have to just have a cohesive plan.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a 2017 facilities and enrollment task force where we presented a sixth grade wing at Henry James
Right.
as we were entering into, I think
Yeah.
that was kind of a phase, potential phase of the project. So at least this group's been talking about it since 2017.
Craig, you and I have been on this a very long time, and we started with, when can we fit a sixth grade in Henry
Right.
James? That was our
With the-
original
with
charge,
the capacity, right?
Right,
The plan.
capacity.
right?
And you did a committee study in 2008. So
Yeah.
there's already been extensive Board of Ed work, and I'm sure
Correct.
there's even more support 12 years later for
Yes.
that 6, 7, 8 model.
And we do know educationally, academically, from the standards, the learning outcomes for students, they're arranged K-5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. And as we've adopted the Common Core standards over the number of years, sixth grade teaching responsibilities have changed dramatically, where we've had to do some specific, like you're gonna be the science teacher and teach reading, and math teacher and teach reading, and social studies science teacher and teach reading. Whatever it is, 3-person or a 4-person or a 2-person team, we've had to really build the content knowledge around that. And there is a difference, and we'll present that, in that regard of the learning outcomes per grade level.
I have a question getting back to just the options in general before we get into, so the sixth grade option, I'm not quite 100% sure on why we are saying there's no option 2A, which is the 4 schools. Because if potentially we get down the road 5 years from now and we built the sixth grade in the Latimer school and enrollment has changed, or the town can't absorb the cost of renovating every school, I just feel like, I don't know if you can just totally throw that out, because the beauty of these was you could change as you went on, like further down the road. So I just want some clarification on why that's off the table.
I think the reason we took out that option last night in our discussions was the town support for closing the elementary schools. It's not
Right,
there.
I understand.
So if we have the enrollment support based on our demographics, because in 5 years, I think 5 years from now, our numbers are pretty solid. Because those kids are already here or, so the option to close the school really doesn't exist. We get just the sixth grade out, now we're redistributing the kids. We're gonna do some redistricting to try to equalize some of the enrollment in some form or fashion. So we don't have one humongous outlying school like a squadron line. So we need the flexibility of the space of the 5 schools to kind of handle that.
And also,
But your point is 20 years down the road,
Well, I'm
you
just,
go through another large dip, what then? Is that really what
well,
you're
yeah,
getting
and
at?
just that you, I don't know.
Because that
if you wanna just
conversation will
say-
never be avoided in reality.
Right, and that's why I
No.
said, like,
and
we can reliably look at the first 10 years and try to make a plan. But the beauty of the phased-in approach is, we're gonna review as we put each new project on. But we're talking about project 1, which is maintaining 5 schools, building this one, and potentially project 2, maintaining 5 schools and renovating the next building. We're not, we can't reliably sit here today as a group and say what the town's gonna look like in 10 years. For the next project,
Okay.
that's 15 years out.
So it is potential 10 or 15 years down that we could close a school if people are moving out of town.
Well, you just
It's
go,
always an
yeah,
option,
you
right?
go through the cycles of
That's-
what
I
we do
guess
on
I'm
an
just
annual
pointing it
basis.
out.
And Lisa's here from the Board of Finance, I don't want to speak for you, but we're always analyzing class sizes, we're always responding to those questions about vacancies. That's never going to go away in
Right.
this community,
Right.
that's all part of the process. And much of what we do from a budget standpoint always rides on enrollment. So that will always get a look and always be in the conversation, but to Susan's point, first best option, a school closure is not involved in
Right.
in creating that. Does that make sense?
And this plan, as it rolls out of this committee and into the Board of Ed, we're not locking down.
future decisions.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's what I was trying to get the word.
Because it's always going to be one phase at a time that needs to be
But
approved anyhow.
we're our point here is to put together a long-term plan that will be reevaluated continuously through, just like our town plan is reevaluated continuously. And when this group first got together, in some of the history, we worked really hard to try to maybe close the school because we thought it was most economical for the town. And in that process, we did all the numbers, we did all the things, and we couldn't do it. I mean, the facts did not come to a point where we could make that
We didn't
happen.
have the space to make it happen.
No, with the numbers and all the things, so I
Yeah,
think that's where we're feeling now.
and I would add to Wendy's point, and I've kind of been upfront on this point. I think if you go into that public forum with 2A on the table, you're gonna get a lot of biased support for 3.
Mhm.
I think people are gonna protect their interests, you're gonna vote your interests. I can say personally, if 2A is on the table, 3 assures me my school stays open. And we've heard from the public forum, you've heard from the town meetings, that's where people are gonna lean. Even if you may kind of like the 6th grade at the middle school, you're gonna protect your school, your neighborhood. So I think you look at it as 2B and 3, I think you get an unbiased, what's best for the kids, what's best for the town. I think we've heard loud and clear, as long as the school's up there to be shut down, right, it was Terriffill at first, Terriffill turned out. You put up there all the zeros for everybody's school, they're gonna see that, and they're not gonna see past it. It's gonna be like the 5th, 6th grade. So if you want an honest opinion, it's gonna be, if you want unbiased, where should 6th grade be? A school being closed can't be on the table because you're not gonna get anything unbiased. Now, to your point down the road, yeah, I mean, I get that's beyond me, but, I mean, I think we've seen things though, Southland, you've been mentioned a lot, right? Where they went the other way, right? Let's close the school, and now you got a 680 instead of 350.
Right.
So, I do think Simsbury's a good town, right? We've seen things like the grand list is going up, people like it, we've heard from other people, if you build it, they will come. So, I think obviously 20 years from now, who knows? But I think you need to go in and be honest with the people too, right? People in the town aren't gonna wanna just be like, oh yeah, no, look here, we'll do something later. I think people need to know honestly, I think Tara's point, the master plan, all intentions, honest, is to keep all your schools open. Now, if our town cuts in half 20 years from now for some reason, sure, but again, if we have new schools and we're growing, and people like Simsbury, you know, I wouldn't imagine that would be the issue. But I do think 2B and 3, you can talk about 6th grade, 2A, you're gonna get more of the same.
Any other comments about this kind of educational lens of looking at 6th grade?
You know, on that, like, because I was gonna comment on that before, but one thing I was curious on, and I looked to Aaron and Scott, I was curious because I was at the meeting last night, got to hear about this, so gave me some time to think some more about, again, open-minded in the 6th grade thing, right? So I would be curious, we're hearing about the literature, which is obviously great, and the staff. One thing that stood out to me, I think everybody saw those results, the staff versus the community, right? I think you've seen a few things, right? The staff saying 6th grade middle school, right? In the community, I think there's some of that bias going in, so I'd be curious if you redid a survey with just 2B kind of thing, you may see the community move a little bit there too, it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
But the literature, the staff, the feedback, one thing I'd be curious on, because we've heard it from in the neighborhood meetings, the public forum, I've heard from other people, is I don't want my 6th grader on a bus with 8th graders. I like the book buddy program and all of that stuff, right? Like you hear it, right? There's that emotional part. I would be curious if, and again, Scott, Aaron, I know you don't want to rely on necessarily kids' views to make important decisions, right? But at the same time, the kids are a major part of this. Would there be any sense or logic in, if Scott, you probably have some in mind, right? Like a certain group of 8th graders at the middle school right now, if you were to like sit them down anonymously, talk to them, survey them, and I don't know if you could share that on 3-4, but for the parents in the audience who maybe have concerns, ask those 8th graders, in hindsight, given how you experienced 6th grade in the elementary school, 7th grade in the middle school, if you had come to the middle school in 6th grade, what would have been better? What would have been maybe worse? What would you have missed out on? I think it would be good for the parents, it's myself, not an administrator, not in school, oldest child's only in 3rd grade, to hear from other students, because we all have this bias, right? So for all of us, we've heard it. So my middle school view was East Hartford High in 1992. Simsbury in 2020 is not East Hartford High in 1992. So I'm clouded in my judgment of what middle school looked like, right? So I'd be curious if it makes sense, or is it too much pressure on kids, or are they too emotional on it? But I'd be curious as a parent, if as part of the forum, as part of your opening say, and we talk to a core group of students and hear some of the views they have. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think that's a great idea. Right now, we're engaged in surveying students and getting their opinions on homework. It's shocking that when I talk with them, someone's like, yeah, we should have homework. Like, I expected them all to say, but they are brutally honest, sometimes to their own detriment. And I think it would be great if they would to involve them in the process, if nothing else, for the educational value of involving them in the process. Before next Tuesday,
We could get
might be a little
small
tricky,
group round.
but we could talk to a few. But to go back to your bus question,
Yeah.
you know, I've had a nice opportunity to be able to reflect on bus is a big part of my job. Or actually, I should say bus was a big part of my job. The 6th grade and kindergarten bus issues are, right? Significant. I have very little issues on the bus with the 7th graders and the 12th graders.
You don't allow your devices?
I mean, I don't know, like, we're very rarely. That's just like from the office view, obviously you hear stuff at home and all, you know, what's going on, and maybe they just report class and all of that, but
To be fair, no 12th graders are on
they're
the
not
bus.
riding the bus.
No 11th graders are on the bus,
They're not
right?
able to. But so, I mean, that's just an anecdote, so I love the idea of talking to kids, it's a great idea.
I think it would resonate really well with parents who don't have the
Pretty sure what
background.
they'd said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I'd love to
interesting
hear
you bring that up. We have 3 students that are new to Hills that have come from a middle school in 6th grade and are now coming back to elementary school in 6th grade. So just had a recent conversation where I was in the classroom and just talking with them about that shift backwards, and now they're walking in lines, and they're being, you know, they have to walk down in a straight line to the cafeteria, and they've got to be escorted everywhere by an adult. So it was just a fascinating thing as you think about asking the kids. Just some perspective. Erin, another point I wanted to just, as I just thought about, is I heard at the public forum a lot around special education. I would really love my own, I couldn't be able to think of it off the top of my head. How does special education look in a 6th grade elementary model versus a 6th grade middle school? I know what it looked like when I was at Thompson Brook in the 5-6 model. And how does that compare? Because there was a lot of sentiment around that, and it's just different at the upper elementary. So with scheduling and things, I know when we shift our 6th grade to 7th grade and we have our transition meetings, that's a very interesting conversation, how our schedule melds into 7th grade, and what would that do as we're supporting students with special education needs in those 2 environments. It was just something I threw on the table.
And then the question does keep coming up with 6th graders at recess or
Right.
like, how would we handle that?
Physical activity.
Do they, right, do they do
Yeah.
something at 5-6?
A lot of
Thompson
those,
Brook,
a
we
lot of
did.
those things, when that decision's made, I
Yeah.
think we'll have the 4 years to kind of figure some of that
Right,
stuff out too.
Right,
And a lot of
but
those
that's,
questions they
people
want.
get stuck on those little
100%, it's
things.
the buses, it's the recess, it's the.
Right.
it's
Yeah.
the
Our 7th and 8th
Yes.
graders go outside for connections.
Yes, they do.
Thompson
So
Brook,
that
we
might
had
be
a whole
something we
playground.
bring up,
So-
some way to weave that into the conversation.
Yeah. It was a developmentally appropriate playground for 5th and 6th graders, if you ever go to Thompson Brook and look at it compared to Pine Grove. So we did, we had a recess model every day, so.
We did too.
So the goal for the next month would be to do some of that work and come back to we have one more scheduled facilities and enrollment task force. Certainly be sharing that. What were we able to learn from the 6th grade teachers, other principals, kids, you know, that type of idea. So that's, I know Erin's looking forward to that. I have one demographic piece to show you that is more about the immediate concerns, so I'm gonna have them pass that way. You want a copy, Cindy?
I got one right here.
I'm gonna let those go around. Almost all the way there, I see them going. Mr. Sickager, you slowed down the pass.
You should be more experienced at this than we are.
All right, so front side of the sheet with those 6 different grids is the most recent Malone and McBroom figures. So, Oh, I can do that,
Can we do that? Sorry, I'm just asking that you guys get a sheet.
Yep, we're good. So the front side of the sheet, so the demographics that Tecton started working with were when Malone and McBroom, when we first engaged in this project. As longtime members of this committee know, the way this cycle works in the school system, you take your October 1st numbers, you turn them back to the demographers. Now at Malone and McBroom, we used to use NASDAQ, and they give you an updated projection. So this is actually the November 2019 projection. This is the sort of, as these things go, the hot off the press version. And the orientation is down the column. The next year is up, then 2 years out, 3 years out, and then you go to the top of the other column for about 4, 5, and 6 years out. So our class size guidelines, if you want to write them down on the sheet, we really look at K1 and 2 as when we go above 22 kids in a grade, in a class, that's when we start to have the conversation about should we break out another section of that class. So K1 and 2 up to 22. For 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, it's up to 25. And in every year, do we have a first grade class that looks like it, that is 23 kids? Yep, that happens every year in one of our schools. We have a couple of sections that will go 1 kid over, and we have been able to either in a tough budget year live with it, in a year where maybe we have a little more flexibility, we have added sections, so we've done it both ways. So I took those numbers and then said, all right, what does it look like for the next 6 years in each school? So if you turn the sheet over, the first column tells you how many K-6 classrooms are in each of our schools. So currently in Central School you have 19. In Latimer it's 21, exactly 3 in every grade level. At Squadron it's 28, exactly 4 in every grade level. At Terrafil it's 14, exactly 2 in every grade level. And Tooten is 18, which is exactly 3 in every grade level. No, that's not right. 2, it goes up and down. Some grade levels have 2, and some grade levels have 3, and that's the case with Central School too. So then, using Malone and McBroom's projections, how many are you going to need? I thought we were going to need 20 next year at Central School based on Malone and McBroom's projections. We do something called a kindergarten census that comes in early, and Central's right now came in low. So we, while we thought we would be at 20 next year for Central, we think we're going to be able to do 19, which sort of takes the pressure off of Central in terms of its ability to absorb for the next, this is a 6-year chart. But you will see that it does increase 1 more classroom, and what that's about is that's about cohorts that only have 2 at each grade level aging out of the school, and 3 kindergartens coming in, and that so when you go all the way out, this is now I made this chart imagining how many in 24-25 if you built a 6th grade wing into Henry James. How many 6th grades could you empty out of each of the elementary schools? And that number in parentheses in the last 2 years is that number. So at Central School in 24-25, if a 6th grade wing existed, 3 classrooms would open up at Central School. So the shaded boxes are meant to show you where the pinch is coming. At Latimer Lane, we are definitely planning on 22 for next year. There's a pretty good chance we could end up with 23 for next year, and 23 the year after that, based on Malone and McBroom's projections. After that, you're looking at a number like 25 to 27, and that's all depending on, you know, when you have a primary grade that comes in at like 68, are you making it 2 classrooms or 3? You know, your class size guidelines would say they start to creep a kid or 2 above. Do you change? So that's where the range is built in. If we hit beyond 23 classrooms at Latimer Lane, something needs to happen. They're really, like, that's where we're talking about modular classrooms. And that has to be watched. At Squadron Line, you look, the projection's called to add one cohort for each of the next 4 years. Squadron Line is an interesting school in that you'll recall that right now, we're using a number of classrooms in the lower hall first wing as preschool. So could you create some capacity by maybe taking a few preschool classrooms and moving them to a less filled school for a few years? Would that be an option? Could you move something like the Ready, Set, Go program for a few years to another school and clear some capacity in Squadron Line? So while Squadron is going to definitely feel the pinch at about the same time as Latimer Lane, I think we have more options at Squadron Line in terms of Terrafil is as consistent with the chart, the steadiest. It's going to remain at 2 per grade level. And Tooten Hills is counting pretty much, the demographics say, you're not going to have any more cohorts of only 2 in a grade level. It's planning on start at 3 kindergartens and kind of go from there. At times it's saying we may even experience 4 in a grade level at Tooten Hills. And so that number can go up, and we have some flexibility options there too. So I would say the highlights of this are definitely the most worried about Latimer, and then Squadron is kind of a second concern. But what you would need to, one of the ways to alleviate that concern is to say, do we have open space at Central or Tooten to move some of these programs? Like, and knowing, all right, if we can make it to 24, 25, when either a renovated Latimer Lane or a new 6th grade wing, those would be kind of what we need to be following. And this is really the work that this committee kind of followed for much of its existence in the past. So what I will also do is get for you, because of those flexibilities, it's why I decided not to put here's the maximum number of rooms that are in each of these schools, because there is flexibility to move some programming to a different school the only one that I will say is going beyond 23 at Latimer Lane is tough. There's really nowhere to go at that point.
And even current configuration at Terrafil, if you were to increase class sizes, they're never getting beyond 2 classrooms.
They're never going beyond 2 classrooms.
Well, and
There's just no space.
is there an understanding of when we do that, like, I think about Mike at, that band and orchestra and what that looks like, that we do have physical space, but right now what that means is that, special education teachers are sharing classrooms and case managers and you're putting up partition walls. I just wonder if there's a true understanding of, yes, there's physical space, but it's not as it exists right now. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
is that all of a sudden when you do say, yes, you can, there's an expense of that in terms of programming when we're thinking about our interventionists. Instead of having 2 interventionists teaching small groups and we have a 3rd person. So you're talking about 3 different adults that are teaching children, our striving learners, right? And you're trying to focus to your teacher, but there's another teacher next to you teaching a lesson and another teacher over here teaching a lesson. I just would love to have that picture and understanding of Mike's out of the box thinking for lots of different things that you're doing. Mike, I know you're constantly thinking about space and where people are seeing kids and how they're seeing kids and in what spaces, because I think that would be eye-opening to the public. How we thought outside the box.
I think that's a really good thought. I mean, the Latimer community, completely on point with what's going on there. There's a real understanding of what's going on, and that came out last night big time, so.
And it was great because the board was able to take a tour of the building last night. So that some of that came to life as in, if this were to go up another section, what would be that first space that would have to be collapsed and where would that collapse go? And if another one, so as we look at those increase in numbers, kind of having those long range conversations of, what are some of those quote unquote flexible spaces and how would that work? How would that live? Sort of what are the, the bare minimums that you need to maintain programs?
When I think about our most dependent learners and what those spaces look like for them when they're trying to get that additional support, that's a concern.
things you've already collapsed some of your spaces as well.
Yeah,
We
there's
saw
a
that
lot
as
of
well.
shared spaces.
Going in next to, we got a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, next to the special ed, the violence.
Right now, when Mike and I engage in the conversation of how do we get 23, when we get 23 K6 class, Mike dreads me walking into Latimer Lane. I'm opening closets, I'm opening every nook and cranny of Latimer Lane right now, trying to say, and there is not an answer beyond 23. It's gonna be modular classrooms.
Which is very short time.
Right.
Plan is have them as short a period of time as possible.
Right.
Because they're not
And
ideal.
And if you're saying, all right, the town has approved a plan, we know something's gonna happen by 2024, do you make different decisions because this is a 2-year thing we're living with, as opposed to a long-term thing you're living with? And we did that for a long time when we had moved kindergartens to another school and looked at it year after year after year, of when could we bring the kindergarten back?
And we heard about that from Latimer parents last night, how that was less than ideal for the Latimer community to have their kindergartners in a different building than the rest of their family.
So this was to sort of demonstrate the two different lenses to look at the question. Is there an educational benefit? You know, I would argue emptying 6th grade out has a demographic benefit, but that necessarily should not, that should be a factor in the decision, not the driving factor in the decision. But, you know, that's part of why we engaged with Tecton in the first place, was to look at, you know, the demographics do contribute to the decision.
You can't discount the demographics completely because that's forcing you to really maybe take a better holistic look at everything.
So, with that said, we're kind of looking for, we have certainly some pieces we know we want to do at the public forum on March 4th, but close the meeting tonight by taking a few minutes from you about anything else you think that's important to convey at next Wednesday night's public forum.
So I think as important as it is to look at the academic structures of our 6th grade, you know, some of the changing social emotional needs of our 6th graders as we look at, you know, comprehensive social emotional learning programs, comprehensive character education programs that appropriately fit a 7-year span is a challenge, and getting your 6th graders to buy into the same thing over a 7-year period of time is can be a significant challenge, because you want something cohesive, you want something tied together, but my 6th graders have different needs, as do my 5th graders, as do my 4th, but there are as we look to tailor things to our kids, you know, what's the best social structures, emotional structures for our kids?
Other thoughts or things that, maybe I put it that, advice for us as we stand up in front of another public forum?
And if you all would come, that's great.
Now, the squadron, I don't know the details as well as many of you, but the numbers are higher, but it doesn't get mentioned as much as Latimer. Is that just that there's space there to still handle it? Because the number, it's such a high number.
And to Neil's point, we've moved over the years when the population significantly decreased, we compensated for that by moving large programs to squadron lines. So like the whole, what used to be the entire 1st grade wing at squadron is now preschool. So you can potentially, once you make that move one of either 6th grade or renovate Latimer, like Neil said, you can move some programs around to other places to buy you a little more time than you can at Latimer. There's no way to buy time at Latimer.
Because that's what I was wondering, is trying to think of like a squadron parent looking at, I don't know if we have any squadron.
Forgot about
So,
Many of us who were squadron parents.
you know, with
14
when they
years.
see this and see, all right, keeping all schools open, got it. Latimer, step 1, 6th grade wing, step 1, good, everyone's step 1, good. You know, what about me? Like, that's the one I'd want. I think, you know, Terrified, I think you'll get a lot of, hey, we're open, but squad.
I mean, the small group test on that, I think they understood when we did the community meeting, but I think that's gotta be part of the narrative, definitely.
Got it.
Can you walk us through the calendar again? How does this tie into if this group's meeting again? Then is there a May or June Board of Ed vote? Is there a Board of Finance vote in the summer or the fall? What?
So the cycle calls for our facilities, the public forum on March 4th. Our next facilities enrollment is at the end of March. Let me find it.
30.
Who's got it?
30.
30th.
30.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy. And another public forum. Jeff Warzinski, do you know when the other public forum goes to?
It's not.
I don't know.
It's not scheduled. So the last one for the spring is not scheduled. So the plan would be for us on March 30th to kind of hear about whatever work educationally and looking. The other thing I want to do demographically that I've shown this committee before is it's hard, to Maggie's point, to imagine how spaces are really being used unless I show you a map of how they're really being used. And we've done that before on this committee to say, you want to know how these classrooms are, and I can get an overview map of all 5 schools so that you can see exactly the demographic challenges that are coming. I thought, once I did this, I said, oh, I need to do that, and I didn't have time
I think
before
it's
we
helpful
did.
because this is something we at the board med see all the time, and I think that drives in the back of our heads all the time, because we actually
The
see them
change
as
in
little
spaces.
kids, we see numbers, but we see them as little bodies in buildings, and I think anytime you can give that lens to people in town, it's helpful, because I think it gets too general too fast.
Right, and I think
What about that,
Yeah,
what about the
the
finance and
final
the vote
step,
phase?
I'm gonna let the superintendent.
Yeah, let me jump on that one. So, we are trying, springtime, sometime in May, we haven't scheduled the meeting, it will be for the Board of Ed to take a position on which model. In the interim, we definitely have to have a collaborative conversation, some kind of detailed conversation with the Board of Finance about what that option is, some numbers so that they can start modeling. Our goal would be to put this, be talking about what that option is in the fall when we come back from school, more conversations with the Board of Finance, and then a spring referendum for whatever first option would be, and that's 2021.
Right, so ultimately, an option has to come out of the Board of Education.
Right.
We'd like it by the
This
end of
year.
this school
The
year,
referendum is
May of
May of
21.
next year.
Right,
So,
and that
which
gives
is
time
why,
for modeling, discussions, how there's a lot that's at play in terms of dialogue that still needs to take
and
place
that's why we
between
say
between the 3 boards in town.
2024 would be the earliest we could open it open, fall of 2024.
I have one more thing I'd like to mention about the presentation of the forum. Is there any way to get some explanation about the data points as to where you came up with your numbers? We see the numbers, this means this, and I know you have a formula that you use for number of students and number of feet, and if some of that could be beneficial. Because people see the numbers and, we don't have any design, we don't have any, so
Enrollment or
we have
cost?
costs,
Okay.
so that we can maybe understand where the
So
data
break down the total a little
Just-
bit.
We have all
Yeah.
that, yeah, we have all that.
Yeah.
So on the cost, I'm curious, a couple things, and maybe we won't get into it in this meeting. But so, first, the timeline before I make my comment was, so March, this group meets, then there's talk of another public forum.
I think we have to see where we are.
Okay, and then, I was just wondering, then would this group meet again, if there was, to kind of debrief from that or something?
keep that same
In
cycle.
April or something like that. So with that in mind, the other thing I was thinking about, last night, coming out of that meeting, and we had mentioned was you mentioned Board of Finance and the cost, right, the efficiency part, right?
Yep.
So I am curious at what point, so I get this public forum's focused on what do we do with the 6th graders? And then I do think then there will be, I know Derek's not here, but I know Lisa's here, like the Board of Finance and things like that is, where are the efficiencies coming from, the dollars? But one thing I would be curious on, this is where I would ask the group to think about maybe at another meeting, and Jeff as well, is one thing I was thinking was, while you think efficiencies, right, like any budget is, you gotta either spend less or make more, right? That's kind of the way you balance a budget. And if we're in a growing town, we're keeping our schools, finding the efficiencies by cuts would be difficult, right? It doesn't make a ton of sense, maybe there's something here and there, but.
Right.
But I was thinking, is there a way to then maybe have this actually bring in more revenue. And what I mean by that, like as we think about how does this look financially, if you're building new things or renovating things, is there anything that could be done? Is there any appetite, is there any thought for thinking outside the box? How can we as a town keep all our schools open, keep our neighborhood school feel, address the demographic solution, and then from a finance standpoint, is there something you could do that actually let these buildings be something that makes more money? So I'm thinking like Jeff, right, in the first public forum, not the second one, everyone thinks was the first, right, there's a lot of talk of solar and all that, right? Like, is there a way to say, like, if we do these new buildings, we can cut down on utility costs, we can cut down on different things, right? Is there a way they make money? Then, is there anything, and maybe just totally, and again, maybe not the meeting for it, but is there a way to then say, if you're building these new buildings, and they're the big shiny new thing, right, or whatever it is, and Tara mentioned this a couple times, these are town buildings. Is there anything where you then use those buildings for different events or things like that, right? Is there, I don't know if it's a security thing or protocol, can you use these buildings in some manner on weekends to bring in revenue, right? Like think Terriffill, right? There's not a lot of places you can just go rent space, right? There's the church, you can use a church hall. Just things outside the box like that. I am curious, is there a way that if you're putting money into the schools, is there a way for the schools to then give back? And does that help with the board of finance or anybody else to say like, the end number, maybe you're not getting cuts as much, but maybe you're increasing revenue in another way? Just a thought.
I mean, the whole operational piece of that is a tremendously important part of the conversation that will have to come. It's figuring out where we're having it. You know, our buildings are in tremendous demand now, so earning revenue in the building, real revenue of dollars that would make any impact would be a challenge just because we don't charge organizations that are within the town, right? So you'd have to be, I mean, there's just, it's not, it's good out of the box thinking, but you would have to have some sort of tremendous value in that would come from an organization out of town that would cost somebody in town not using that. So I mean, there's just a lot of play there. It's not like we can't look at it. There was an experience I had managing a project when I was in Glastonbury where they built the planetarium on the building, and they had grand visions that was going to be the piece that was going to draw revenue. I know they rent it out to some aspect. We can look into that. I don't think it's a huge amount of revenue though. You know what I mean? But something to look at.
Yeah. So do those right, so like soft dollars, if you will, versus hard dollars, like do those soft dollars help at all when you're trying to put this forth to Board of Finance or whoever else? So I'm just thinking that if there was another public forum after the 6th grade focus, then the next focus, right, there was the keep the schools open, now 6th grade. Then it's going to get to the hard dollars. And is there then a public forum to present like, and here's the economic impact and here's how we can mitigate it and things like that? Because when it goes to referendum, you're going to need that public support.
I feel like if we were going to do that might come more like next fall, once we have maybe settled on a plan and worked through some of the details.
It could be more of a joint conversation of the boards too.
Yeah, I think that might be more effective if we had all 3 boards up there, if we had the support to move forward.
I have one more comment, so I'll be quick. I agree that what Tara said, the March 4th, there should be more of a drill down on the costs of this option, because before you were inundating everybody with multiple costs over multiple years for option A, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So realistically, people could see what their costs were on the timeline. And then one other thing that has been off the table is that maintenance option, which I know it's not going to be the sole option anymore, but it's always going to be an ongoing thing, right? So to just say that we're not doing option 4 anymore, you're always going to be doing maintenance. But it's
I just want to be clear with that.
Right?
Option 4 was never presented as,
To anybody?
hey, this is our long-term plan. This is option 4. It's something we're really thinking about. It came to evolve as we got feedback on.
We had people asking what's
What
the
if
cost
you
of doing
do nothing? And then
Okay.
the response was, we can't really do nothing because there's ongoing needs.
Yeah, okay, so people would just need to understand that you're still gonna be fixing if a school needs
We're not-
something over the years.
I think the point is that it would be, option 4 would be our only option.
Right, that's
And
what I'm
that's
saying.
what, so
It's
we don't want that to be our
ongoing.
only
Yeah.
option. We will always be
Right.
maintaining our
Right.
buildings as we have in, but the other piece is, it probably was on the beginning, like, look, this, when our first Tektron presentation was, this is what we have. And if we don't do anything, this is what, this is our
We have to do
catastrophic, what's gonna
So
happen.
that's why I'm kind of, when I say it,
It's taking it off.
I know, it's not a
It's just out of
standalone
the
option, it's
presentation
an
because-
ongoing thing
because
along
it's
with
what we
whatever
do all the
option.
time.
Yeah, I get
It's
that.
what we've always done, so it's not a new option for people to have an opinion on. It's just the way we've always
Right.
done our building maintenance.
But I see it coming into play conversationally in Q&A of, hey, if we can't do this for another year or another 2 years, what do you need to get done first?
Right.
Well, this is our priority maintenance list, right?
And we have that.
You bring it out that way.
Any other final comments about the forum? Jeff, after you've presented so many times, you want to take a closing thought on what you heard today?
No, you did a great job.
I could have had a free night.
No, I just want to echo the comments that I think Neil covered in the presentation, that the 3 slides or so that we heard from the neighborhood meetings, that they were fairly consistent at each of the neighborhood meetings, and the participation was great. I think the dialogue and communication during those meetings was fantastic, and I think you're starting to see that it's starting to gel. The options, as I mentioned early on, even though it was kind of cloudy in the beginning, with the dialogue, the options start to come to the surface and make sense. So I'm excited to the next step. So.
Great, thank you.
We're all good?
You need a motion. to
Okay,
adjourn.
so I would need a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
There you go.
And
Thank
March
you all.
30th is our next meeting.
March 30th
On the
next
forum
meeting.
next Wednesday, March 30th is our next
Hope
meeting.
to see you here at the auditorium at 7 o'clock.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.